in in the
Eight.
US now, bro?
It's
Oh, it's 8.
8 Central. It's 9 Eastern, but we're 1 hour
Okay.
behind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting, huh? Yeah, you have so many time zones in the US. It's confusing for me.
4 to be exact, and then Hawaii and Alaska are on their own as well.
Too many.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
6 then,
too
apparently.
many, too many. But then it's nice to live in a country where you have seasons. In Singapore, you have just 2 seasons. It's rain or shine. That's it.
Bro,
Nothing
it's
else
so
happens.
cold right now. I would
It's
take
cold, huh?
rain or shine right now. This
Well,
morning,
it's
it was like 19 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit with 8 degrees with the wind chill this morning. It was horrible.
wow, 19 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold. That's cold.
It was
Yeah.
very
You know, it's fun coming from countries like Singapore to get into the cold for a while. But I think everyone tells me when you keep staying on, that's a different thing, isn't it?
It's different, yeah.
terrible.
Well, right now it's 34 degrees Celsius in Singapore.
The best weather.
But the problem in Singapore, it's always humid. So that's another thing.
Here too.
Okay. All right. So it's 8 o'clock. So we'll do if you're okay with it, Prabhu, we'll do just a quick kirtan and
Please carry on. Always happy to hear kirtan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, Vishnu Charan, Prabhu.
Do you want to do 10 minutes or 15 minutes?
Dad? Is there a preference?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay.
And then Yeshwati after that, right?
Yeah, then our I think Sridhar singing Yashamati Nandan.
Yeah. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashata Desha Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashata Deshatari Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shiva Shadi Gaura Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yashomati Nandana Brajavayanagara Gokulara Janakana, Yashomati Nandana Brajavayanagara Gokulara Janakana, Gopi Paranadana Madana Manohara, Gopi Paranadana Madana Manohara, Kaliyadamana Vidana, Kaliyadamana Vidana, Amala Harinam Abhiyavilasa, Amala Harinam Abhiyavilasa, Amala Harinam Abhiyavilasa, Amala Harinam Abhiyavilasa, Vipina Purandara Navina Nagara Bara, Navina Nagara Bara, Bamsi Badana Suvasa, Bamsi Badana Suvasa, Raja Jana Palana Surakula Nasana, Raja Jana Palana Surakula Nasana, Nanda Godana Raghuvala, Nanda Godana Raghuvala, Govinda Madhava Navanita Taskara, Govinda Madhava Navanita Taskara, Sundara Nanda Gopala, Sundara Nanda Gopala, Yamuna Tatachara Gopi Vasanahara, Yamuna Tatachara Gopi Vasanahara, Rasarasika Kripa Moya, Rasarasika Kripa Moya, Shri Radha Vallabha Vrindavana Natavara, Shri Radha Vallabha Vrindavana Natavara, Bhakti Vinoda Acharya, Bhakti Vinoda Acharya, Bhakti Vinoda Acharya, Bhakti Vinoda Acharya. Lord Krishna is the beloved son of Mother Yashoda, the transcendental lover in the land of Vraja, the delight of Gokul Kana, the wealth of the lives of the gopis. He steals the mind of even Cupid and punishes the Kalya serpent. These pure, holy names of Lord Hari are full of sweet nectarian pastimes. Krishna is the lord of the 12 forests of Vraja. He is ever youthful and is the best of lovers. He is always playing on a flute, and he is an excellent dresser. Krishna is the protector of the inhabitants of Raja, the destroyer of various demoniac dynasties, the keeper and tender of Nanda Maharaj's cows, the giver of pleasure to the cows, land, and spiritual senses, the husband of the goddess of fortune, the butter thief, and the beautiful cowherd boy of Nanda Maharaj. Krishna wanders along the banks of the river Yamuna. He stole the garments of the young damsels of Braj who were bathing there. He delights in the mellows of the rasa dance. He is very merciful, the lover and beloved of Srimati Radharani, the great dancer of Vrindavan, and the shelter and only refuge of Thakur Bhakti Vinod.
Thank you, Vishisharan Prabhu. Thank you, Sridhar. So today we are joined by His Grace Devikinandan Prabhu, all the way from Singapore. So without taking up more time, Prabhu, please take it away.
Thank you, Abhishek Prabhu. Thank you to all the devotees. Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. So wishing you all a very wonderful Krishna conscious New Year ahead. And thank you for giving me this wonderful service and your wonderful association. I don't know how much we can travel this year, but at least, through these portals, we are able to take association. I was thinking what to speak on today, and I thought for the next 3 sessions, and I'm assuming that I would have 3 sessions with you, let's focus on one very important devotee's life in Srimad Bhagavatam, and that would be Chitraketu Maharaj in the 6th canto. It's a very wonderful episode of Chitraketu Maharaj, and it should be divided into 3 parts. The first part will be Chitraketu Maharaj and the loss of his child and how he comes out of it. And in the second part, we see how Chitraketu Maharaj handled a very tricky situation where he was cursed by Mother Parvati. Very practical lessons to learn from that. And then the third time we come together, let us remember Chitraketu Maharaj as he became the great Vritrasur. And that pastime is also very wonderful. So all these 3 pastimes, at the center of it is this great and amazing devotee, Chitraketu Maharaj. So I was thinking that today, let us just immerse ourselves in understanding how Chitraketu Maharaj handled a very difficult time in his life. And it's a very practical point in Bhagavatam, because at some point or the other, we will all have to handle the loss of loved ones. It's going to come, whether we like it or not. And while we are thinking of how it would be like and where would we be and in what kind of state we would be, we should not also forget that, while looking at everyone else and thinking how they will go, our time is also ticking, and we may go even before them. So these are very sobering points from Srimad Bhagavatam. Generally, in the material world, it is not considered very auspicious to speak about, such topics. But Bhagavatam is completely spiritual. And in fact, Srila Prabhupada reminded us that our entire life is a preparation for death. So a devotee doesn't become depressed talking about such topics. In fact, we become very lively. So that's why sometimes people become confused when they hear devotees talking about such topics. Chitraketu Maharaj was a great king, and he was in the province known as Surasena. And at that time, Bhagavatam tells us he ruled the entire earth. This was a time when Bharatvarsh was not just confined to geographical India as we know it today, but the entire world. And during his reign, Bhagavatam tells us he was so powerful as a king, and he was such a great devotee of the Lord, that all the devatas were so happy and so pleased, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself was so pleased, that all the necessities of life were given by Mother Earth, and all the blessings were showered upon during his reign. Chitraketu Maharaj had many wives, and in fact, although he was, capable of producing a child, somehow or another, with so many wives, his desire to receive a child from any of them did not bear fruit. And by the will of providence, Bhagavatam says, all his wives were barren. So it is stated in Bhagavatam that Chitraketu Maharaj was very beautiful in form. He was very youthful. He had all the great qualities of a king. He was born to good parentage. He had very high education. He was wealthy. He was opulent. He was very talented. And he was such a great leader that all the citizens, were always blessing him for endowing them with so much assets. And yet, despite having everything which anyone in the material world can have, Chitraketu Maharaj was always full of anxiety. Why? Because Bhagavatam tells us he did not have that one thing that he wanted, and that was to have a child. Actually, this is a very important point that Srimad Bhagavatam pushes to us. Very often in life, the nature of the living entity is that whatever that we have, is not very often the thing that we hanker for because we have it already. But that one object that we don't have and someone else has suddenly becomes the source of great anxiety for us. It must have happened to us at some point of our lives. It may be a child, it may be no child. The grass is always greener on the other side. Those who are not married always look at those who are married and they say, oh, how nice it is to get married. Those of you who have been serving long-term marriages, you may just turn to them and say, hold on, be happy where you are. Who knows? Those who have children will tell you, that it's wonderful to have children. But those who don't have children will say, I'm waiting to have children. And I remember, for example, it took us 8 years to have our first child. And we kept looking at every couple who had a child and thinking how nice it is to have a child. And when the child came, everything was so nice. But now they're in their teenage years and they have their own ideas and they have, horns growing in all kinds of places. And then we start to think, oh, life was a little bit peaceful before. This is life. Chitraketu Maharaj had everything. And yet something always catches us. And in this case, it was not having a child. His queens, Bhagavatam tells us, they were so beautiful. Bhagavatam is so specific. They had attractive eyes. They had opulences. They had so much of Lakshanam, And even though the land was doing well, the queens were happy, everybody was fine, Chitraketu Maharaj was very anxious. One day, Bhagavatam tells us he had a visit from a special guest, a great rishi known as Angira, who's known as one of the great Sapta rishis. He was traveling all over that time in the world. And as all good sages are, they always travel to give us good association. And so Angira came by the sweet will, by his own sweet will. He came to the kingdom of Chitraketu. And he heard that this king was very godly and very saintly, and he wanted to give him association. When Chitraketu Maharaj saw Angira, he became very happy. And Bhagavatam tells us he offered him worship, which was so nice and so humbling from his part, actually. After giving him good food and treating him as the perfect host, when the rishi was seated very comfortably, the king, restrained his mind and senses, and he sat on the ground beside the rishi's feet. This is really the mark of a humble and true devotee of the Lord. He was not possessed of his pride as being a king. Chitraketu Maharaj was very humble, Bhagavatam tells us. And as he was seated at the lotus feet of the sage, Angira congratulated him for his humility and his hospitality. These are two very wonderful qualities, of devotees. I may want to say here that even though I've not physically entered your homes, all for the whole year, that you have welcomed me, you have welcomed me with so much hospitality. And I'm very, very touched by that. I feel like I've actually walked into your house. And this is the Bhagavatam way, actually. With so much humility and hospitality, you have given me a chance to have your service. And that is why Angira was very happy with King Chitraketu. So then he looked at him, and the king and Angira realized something was wrong. And he asked Chitraketu very plainly, Chitraketu Maharaj, the kingdom is doing very well. Everything is very nice. But just by looking at your face, I can understand and observe that your mind is not pleased and your mind is restless. Your pale face reflects your anxiety. Actually, all these great acharyas and these great Vaishnavas, they say actually that the face is the index of the mind. And just by seeing our faces, the glow of our faces, for example, they can come to know whether our sadhana is good, whether we are troubled, whether we are doing our regulated principles nicely. That's why our spiritual masters are very discerning of us, actually. So in the same way, Angira could understand that, Chitraketu Maharaj was not very well, actually. So Chitraketu Maharaj heard this and immediately responded. He said it in a very interesting point. He said, my dear sage, just like, a person who is aggrieved by hunger and thirst, he is not pleased, by you offering him flower garlands, for example. He's not interested in you giving him anything else because he's hungry and thirsty and you're not addressing that. So in the same way, my dear Angira Rishi, I have an empire, I have opulence, I have possessions. They're all very desirable to everyone. But because I have no child, I am very anxious. Therefore, Angira Muni, kindly do something. He turns to Angira Rishi and he says, do something somehow that a child can come to deliver us from this hellish condition. This is a very important point. Now, at this point of time, I want to frame one very important concept from Bhagavatam. This concept is found in the 3rd canto, 25th chapter, 11th verse. When you have time, look at it. In the 3rd canto, 25th verse, 11th shloka, Devahuti is speaking to her son Kapila Dev. And there, Devahuti says something very important. She says that, I have taken shelter of your lotus feet because your lotus feet are worth taking shelter of. And there are 2 words in Sanskrit that are used there. One is Sharanam. And we all know Sharanam means to surrender. But the important word before Sharanam is Sharanyam. Sharanyam means that which is worth taking shelter of. And so Devahuti catches this very important principle of devotional service, that before we can surrender, we must know whom to surrender to. That which is worthy of surrender will give our surrender a very strong shelter. The verse is 3:25:11. So this is very important point. Sharanyam must come before Sharanam. If we try to take shelter of anything in this material world, and we think it is worthy of taking shelter, then while we surrender very nicely, because that which is not worthy of taking shelter has become the shelter for us, that surrender will have no value. Because that surrender, even though the principles of surrender are there, we are not surrendering to the person who is worthy of taking shelter. You see the difference? That is why Prabhupada said, we should surrender to the bona fide spiritual master. We should surrender to Parampara. We should surrender to Krishna. Because Krishna, Devahuti says, is the only supreme person who is worthy of taking shelter. Why do I bring this up here? Because Chitraketu Maharaj said something that was very dangerous for him. For him, it was very dangerous because in his case, what happened was he thought that by having a child and surrendering to that concept, he would become happy. But he did not realize that having a child or not having a child, if we take shelter of that which is not worthy of taking shelter, the surrender to that concept will not bring happiness to us. For example, if we think that getting a new job will make me happy, we've got news coming. If we think that getting married is the source of happiness, we've got news coming. If we think just having children will be that we are liberated, we've got news coming. So like that, we are always looking in this material world for that which is worth taking shelter of. And Chitraketu thought by having a child, everything would be solved. But Angira listened very carefully. Angira was a great rishi. He was born of Lord Brahma's mind, Bhagavatam tells us. And so he was very merciful. But Angira realized one thing very important. Chitraketu Maharaj was in no condition to hear Bhagavatam. Have you come across situations where, you feel that you're talking to someone, but they are just not hearing. They just want something in a certain way. Prabhupada says there are 3 different ways to receive knowledge. The highest way is to hear and receive it. The second way is to simply experience it because you don't want to hear. So if someone tells me there's a ditch 2 meters ahead, I have 2 choices or 3 choices. One choice is I hear the person and not go that way. Second choice is I don't believe you. Let me walk there, fall into the ditch, and then I'll know, there's a ditch. The third way, of course, is don't forget about the whole thing and just walk away. Now, it is known in Bhagavatam as the highest knowledge when we actually obey and follow, and then we learn. But Chitraketu Maharaj was not in that position. So Angira said, all right, since you are so much caught up in the idea that a son must be there or a child must be there to deliver you from this hellish condition, if you think the child is the source of the solution to ridding of the hellish condition, then this is what I will do. He performed a sacrifice, and from the sacrifice, he took the oblations. Remnants of the food that was offered in the yajna were taken by Angira, and after that given to the first chosen queen of Chitraketu Maharaj. And her name, I think, was Kritadyuti. Kritadyuti. So Kritadyuti was given that oblations because obviously, it couldn't be given to everyone. So after she took it, the great sage then told the king parting words, very important words. He said, "Oh, great king, now you will have a son. That son will be the cause of both jubilation and lamentation. And that's why he will be known as Harsha Shoka. Harsha and Shoka. Both lamentation as well as happiness." And when he said that, Chitraketu Maharaj did not realize the import of it. He thought, well, in life, everything has jubilation and lamentation, right? Of course, when we have children, there'll be good times and bad times. I'll just take it when it comes. The sage then left. And Bhagavatam says a very important point here. When he left, he did sadhus are. Sadhus give us very practical ways to move forward, but they are not dependent on how we respond to them. They give us transcendental knowledge, unadulterated. And they are not dependent on how we take it or how we don't. They don't monitor it that way. This is perfect sadhu. And so Angira left. Now Bhagavatam tells us that when a poor man gets some money after great difficulty, what does he do? His affection for money increases, isn't it? Bhagavatam's examples are very nice. That's why it's so practical. And so Bhagavatam says, in that same way, when Chitraketu Maharaj, after great difficulty, got a child, his affection for the child increased day after day. When the child was born, his affection for the child just increased day by day. And so too did the affection of the mother, Kritadyuti. Her affection also increased. And because she bore the child, Chitraketu Maharaj's affection for her also increased. All these are very natural things that happen in this material world. And when that happened, another natural, unfortunate thing happened. All the other wives were neglected by Chitraketu Maharaj. Husband is enough. That's all we can take, actually. We can't take any more than that. How much to balance with so many wives, or so many husbands? And so when that happened, Chitraketu Maharaj, he did not realize that there was an imbalance of his affection. And that actually affected the mood of the other queens. When they saw how the child became the attention and focus, and how Kritadyuti became the source of the king's gratitude and love, they became envious. They became extremely unhappy. And because of the king's negligence towards them, they started becoming polluted in their envy. This is a very important point in the material world. When we don't get something, when we feel we are entitled to it, and when we don't get it, and when someone else gets it, it's very natural for us to feel envious of that person. But we envious of others, we become very critical of them. And in envy, we do things that we should not do. Things that we normally would not even think, we will do it. Because the function of the mind, Bhagavatam says, is whatever you think long enough, you start feeling for it. And whatever you feel long enough, you will yourself to do it. That's why Bhishmadev said in his prayers, thinking, feeling, and willing, they are the functions of the mind. And so these queens thought and thought of how painful it was, their condition was. And they felt it very much and they acted on it. So what did they do? In the dead of the night, unknown to Kritadyuti, unknown to the nurse, and unknown to Chitraketu, they did a terrible thing. They poisoned the child in its sleep. And when they did that, they feigned ignorance and they went to sleep. And when that happened, right, unaware that poison administered, in the morning, the nurse went to pick up the child and wake the child up, as the queen had asked her to do. And when she saw not understand that the child was dead actually. And when the maid went up and approached the child Bhagavatam says was lying down. But when she turned it, she saw that the eyes of the child had turned upwards. Sometimes when we leave our body, our eyes turn upwards. Such a terrible scene it must have been. When the maid servant saw that the child was in this condition, she said very loudly, "Alas, I am doomed." When Chitraketu Maharaj's queen Kritadyuti came and she saw the child in that way, she swooned in despair. She started speaking like a mad woman. She started saying, "My dear son, you have slept for such a long time." She spoke to the child like it was alive. She said, "Why are you sleeping now? Your playmates are calling you. Don't play with me like this. You must be hungry. Get up now. Do not put us in lamentation." Then it struck her that the child will not wake up, and she started crying piteously. She said, "My son, we are in the most unfortunate position because we can no longer see your mild and sweet smile. You will no longer speak to us now because you have closed your eyes forever. I conclude now that you have left us all. You have gone to some faraway planet where you will not return. I can no longer hear your pleasing voice." So it was a very piteous sight when Chitraketu Maharaj walked in and saw what had happened. When the source of his greatest happiness had been cruelly taken away from him, the king swooned in despair. His grief knew no bounds, and the whole kingdom became plunged. It became plunged in despair. When that happened, Bhagavatam said that the queens, when they heard about it, they had plotted. They also pretentiously started crying, not willing to show what they had done actually. When the great Angira Rishi heard about this, he understood that the king was almost dead in an ocean of misery. He decided it was now time to come back and pay him another visit. This is the mercy of sadhus. But this time he did not come alone. This time he brought with him another great, exalted, pure devotee of the Lord, Narada Muni. So Narada and Angira came back to give sadhu sangha to Chitraketu. When they came, they saw a terrible sight. Chitraketu Maharaj was lying down like a dead body at the side of the dead body of his son. He had still not allowed the cremation of his child. And when Narada and Angira saw him in that manner, they smiled and they spoke very affectionately and kindly to the king. And what they say today is what they are saying to us, because one day all of us will be in this situation. It's only a matter of who we will be lamenting for, but that situation is going to come. And what they say today is so important for us to take to heart. The first point, what relationship does the dead body that you are lamenting for have with you? What is your relationship with this dead body? What relationship does your wife have with this dead body? You say now that you are related as father and mother, and therefore he is your son. But let me ask you a question. Do you think this relationship existed before? And do you think this relationship will truly exist after this? Do you think it will continue in the future? So this was the first question he asked him. Then Narada said, my dear king, as these small particles of sand, on a beach, what happens? When the water wave pushes the sand, they all come together for a while, isn't it? And when the waves touch the sand, they are all again separated by the force of the waves. And in that separation of the force of the waves, they go away from each other. But the time and the sand, they understand that this is part of the waves of time. In the same way, Narada said, the living entities, the moment you accept the sharir, every one of us, we must accept that with the sharir comes this point, that sometimes like grains of sand, we will be put together. And sometimes we will be separated by the force of time. This is a very important point. Then Narada said the third point. He said, my dear king, because you and I, your advisors, your wives, your children, you must understand one characteristic about us. everything moving and even non-moving, we have one situation that we cannot run away. We are all bhautikanam cha bhavanam. Bhautikanam cha bhavanam means we are always going to deteriorate. And therefore we are never going to be permanent. We're always temporary. And that is true of all of us. Everything we have ever had has never lasted with us. The longest lasting relationship we have is with our own sharir. But it will end at the point when we die. That's the longest lasting relationship. All other relationships will outlive us, or we will have to die before that. Is there. The moment the sharir leaves us, nothing stays with us. We are looking for permanence in a world by whose very nature is temporary. So logically speaking, how can you find permanence in something which is temporary? If you're trying to find permanence in something which is temporary, then what will happen is that you will become anxious and eventually frustrated. This was Narada Muni's point. Therefore, he said, before your birth, this situation with the child did not exist. And after our death, this situation with your child will also not exist. So your situation is temporary. But he said something very important. It is not false, my king. This is an important point. It is not that now we become sadhus and we renounce our children and we walk away from everything and we say, I don't love you anymore, I don't care for you because we are detached. That is artificial detachment. We must care for the living entities who have come to us because they've come to us by the arrangement of Krishna. Did any one of us select our parents? Parental selection was not in our capacity at all. No one selected your parents. We may select our wives and our husbands, but after selecting them, can we select our children? We can't select our children. So therefore, everything that's given to us is more or less given by Krishna. Our children are given by Krishna. For good or for bad, they are given to us. But how we deal with them is the key. And that is what Narada was talking to Chitraketu. Not that this is a false situation, but accept that it is temporary. And now he says something very powerful. My dear king, if you are absorbed in something where you are lamenting for something which is going to be temporary, then it is not suitable for a great devotee like you. We have now come to relieve you of your lamentation. Your lamentation is there because of the darkness of your ignorance and poor fund of knowledge. That is why Srila Prabhupada gave us Bhagavatam. Because by continuously coming together like this in Sadhu Sangha, by hearing patiently and praying to Krishna that Krishna will give us the strength to receive this knowledge, then this knowledge will change our consciousness. Now Angira speaks. Angira tells Chitraketu Maharaj, when I first came to your home, my king, I could have given you supreme transcendental knowledge. But I saw that your mind was so absorbed in sense perception, so absorbed in material things. I decided, let me give you a son first and let you understand the slabs of Maya. Because this son will be a source of jubilation and lamentation. This is also an important point. Sometimes when we preach to living entities, we should not think or expect that immediately overnight they will change. How patient was someone to preach to us? How patient were the devotees to hear all our nonsense and whatever we did? They never gave up on us, but they knew that one day Krishna consciousness will touch our hearts. Angira Rishi never gave up on Chitraketu Maharaj, but he knew what was coming, but he was prepared to come back and give him more sadhu sangha. And now he says something that is very powerful for all of us. Angira Muni said, now what you are experiencing, my dear King Chitraketu, is actually the misery of persons who have sons and daughters. It's found in Bhagavatam. It is the misery experienced by persons who have sons and daughters. Oh, great king, one's wife, one's husband, one's house, the opulence of one's kingdom, various other opulences, whatever that you own and that you think you have, please accept that they are temporary. They are all temporary. You may have great kingdoms, military power, servants, ministers, friends and relatives, but they cannot come with you to the funeral pyre because only your sharir will go with you. And at the point when you leave this body, Not even your sharir will be with your atma when you leave this world. You come with nothing and you will leave with nothing. And he says all this temporary paraphernalia, they are no better than illusions, dreams, and mental concoctions. Powerful preaching, very powerful preaching. And Prabhupada in these purports is really powerful when you read them. He's just hammering this point home actually. And after hearing Angira Rishi, after hearing Narada Muni, Chitraketu Maharaj's countenance began to change. And so now Narada Muni will end by saying this point. He says, my dear King Chitraketu, please carefully consider the position of your Atma. Carefully consider and try to understand these words that we are giving. Understand that as long as you don't inquire about the spiritual values of life, you will be defeated. This is the mantra that we must remember. In 555 of Srimad Bhagavatam, very easy, 555 of Srimad Bhagavatam. The same point is given by Rishabdev Maharaj to all his sons. It's a very nice verse. Prabhupada liked this verse. Parabhavasta vadabodha jato yavanna jignashata atma tattvam yavat kriyastavad idam manovai karmatmakam yena sharira bandha. Karmatmakam. The translation is very important. In that verse, Rishabdev tells his sons, as long as you do not inquire into the spiritual values of life, you will be defeated and you will be subjected to miseries arising from ignorance. We should put this up very big, in front of us every time we wake up in the morning and look at it first thing. Because that is the basis of coming out of miseries. Are we inquiring about the spiritual values of life? You all are. That's why your faces are glowing. That's why you are taking time to be with Bhagavatam. This whole exercise is to inquire into the spiritual value. Because Rishabdev says, whether it is sinful or pious, karma always has a result in action. You can't run away from it. It will have a result in action. So whether you engage in good deeds, bad deeds, karma is coming. In Ramayana, they say Ramban. Once Ram has shot an arrow, the arrow must find its target, correct? Once we have shot the arrow of an action, that arrow must find its consequence. That is the target. We cannot run away. So if we don't use this life to inquire about the spiritual value of life, we will end up like Chitraketu Maharaj, always lamenting. Maybe the object of lamentation may change, but the principle of lamentation will continue. It will continue. This is very important. Now Chitraketu Maharaj had heard from Narada, he had heard from Angira. By the mystic potency of Narada wasn't finished, By the mystic potency of Narada did something very amazing. What did he do? He actually caused the living entity who was actually occupying the body of this child to re-enter into the body. To re-enter into the body. And he told this child, "O living entity, all good fortune to you. Just see your father and mother. I'm giving you an opportunity to come back into your body. See your father and mother who are lamenting for you and who have missed you so much. Come back because you have died in an untimely manner. Accept the royal throne, accept the love of your parents, and rule this kingdom." A bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? And after preaching so much to Chitraketu, forget your son, drop everything. Suddenly, he gets his son to wake up and he tells his son, wake up now, enjoy your time with your parents. Narada, of course, had a strategy because he understood the workings of this universe. The child wakes up to the amazement of the parents. But what does the child say? The child has only one point to say. My dear Narada, thank you very much for awakening me now. But I have only one question. When you say that your father and mother are here before you, which father and mother are you talking about? In which life are you talking about? They appear to be my father and mother, but they are only father and mother to the sharir. They are not father and mother to the causeless, eternal, living entity that I am. My only father and my only mother is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the only father and mother I've had. I've had so many father and mothers before. I have never remembered them at all. And now again, I will not remember them at all. And that is so true. Painful, but true. We say so much, I love you very much. To those whom we loved before. Because today we don't know who they are, where they are. All that effort has counted for nothing. It's a very important point. When the child said that, Chitraketu Maharaj came to his senses. He came to his senses. He just realized now, he woke up, because when he heard the conditioned soul, his son, speaking in this way, Chitraketu Maharaj accepted the teachings of his dead son. So there are three gurus in this story actually. Angira came first to set the scene. Narada came back with Angira to give more spiritual knowledge. But the ultimate guru here is a little child, that soul that came to inhabit that body and woke up his parents to understand this. Bhagavatam says a powerful realization dawned upon Chitraketu. It dawned upon his queen Kritadyuti, and it dawned upon all the other queens. Because what they had done was also useless. What they had done was not correct. And so, as he stood there, Chitraketu Maharaj cut off the shackles of his affection, which was, Bhagavatam says, due to the relationship which was temporary. And he gave up his lamentation. He gave up his lamentation. After all the relatives had discharged their duties, after the funeral rites had been given, everyone gave up their illusion, lamentation, fear, and pain. Why fear? The greatest fear we have in this world, Bhagavatam says, is the fear of loss of that which is precious to us. That is why lamentation comes. Lamentation is the cousin of fear. When you're fearful of losing something, you will lament. So actually the source of all our problems is the fear that we will lose something. But when we understand that doesn't belong to us, then instead of holding on to it, what will we do to it? We will serve it. Or we will use our efforts to bring it to Krishna. That is how we come out of this attachment. Chitraketu Maharaj's episode does not tell us to discard our children, our parents. It doesn't tell us to discard our wives and husbands. No, it doesn't tell us not to love them. But it tells us not to be attached, nor artificially detached from them. So then if we are not attached or detached from them, what must we do for them? We must serve them. That is very important. When we realize they have been sent to us as Krishna's gifts to us, our duty becomes to serve them. In Adi Leela, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela 6:44, 6th chapter, 44th verse. This mood of service is stated very nicely by Krishnadas Kaviraj Maharaj. Krishnadasa abhimane ye ananda sindhu koti brahma sukha nahe tara eka bindu. Very beautiful. The translation is very nice. The concept of servitude to Krishna generates such an ocean of joy in the soul that even the joy of oneness with the Absolute, if multiplied 10 million times, cannot be compared to a drop of that service mood that we get from Krishna. So this shows us the service, when we serve anything in relation to Krishna, when we serve our children by serving them as part and parcel of Krishna, when we serve our wives and husbands, trying to always bring them closer to Krishna, that joy that we experience is immeasurable. When we try to speak about Krishna to living entities, not being attached to what we say, nor being detached artificially, but just in the mood of service, we become very happy. Now he surrendered to Narada, and Narada gave him shelter as the Diksha Guru. And when he gave him shelter as Diksha Guru, Narada now introduced him to a very important thing. He gave him very powerful prayers that Chitraketu must repeatedly chant. Because Chitraketu was humble and submissive, in that mood, Narada was reciprocal. And this is how we actually advance in spiritual life. When we understand we've made a mistake, man up to it, as they say. Stand up and repent. Chitraketu was not proud. I'm a king. Oh, I've been caught in a very embarrassing situation. No. The more lower we bend, the more Krishna and the Vaishnavas become pleased. What do we lose? And so Narada gave him beautiful mantras to chant. And within 1 week of chanting these mantras, Chitraketu Maharaj had darshan of the Lord himself in the form of Lord Anantadev. Bhagavatam says, Lord Anantadev. Anantadev is a feature of Sankarshan, or rather Sankarshan is a feature of Anantadev. Very powerful potency of the Lord. And if you read Bhagavatam, you realize that Anantadev and Sankarshan are the deity forms that Lord Shiva is always meditating on in his aspect of destruction of this material creation. So he had the great darshan of the Lord himself. Now, at this point of time, there's a very important verse in Bhagavatam that tells us what happened to Chitraketu Maharaj when he took darshan of the Lord. If any time, if you want to tell anyone about what will happen when we take darshan of the deity of the Lord, even the deity, you all have deities, even the picture of the Lord, this verse in 6 cantos, 16 chapter, 31st, 6:16, 31, yes, 6:16, 31, it tells us very clearly the wonderful effects of it. And this is why we relish Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam is so practical that just by reading it, we can come to understand what we must do and what will be the effect when we do it. In 6:16, 31, Chitraketu Maharaj, is being explained in this manner. Tadarshana dvasta samasta kilbisham swasta malanta karana bhyayan munihi pravriddha bhaktya pranaya shulochanaha prahrishta roma namat adi purusham. And the translation is very nice. In the translation, they stated, as soon as Maharaj Chitraketu saw the Supreme Lord, what happened to him? Number one, he was cleansed of all material contamination. This is what happens when we take darshan of the deities. The moment we see the deities, whether we know it or not, we are cleansed of all material contamination. The moment we are cleansed of it, thing that happened, because he became completely purified. Very important. Now, how did he behave? In the second line of the translation, he became silent and he became grave. So nice, huh? Silent, Prabhupada writes, actually doesn't mean that we are just quiet and we don't speak about Krishna. Silence means we speak everything about Krishna and not anything about anything material. That is the meaning of silence. And he became very grave. Grave means sober. He understood life, It's easy to remember grave. If you're not grave about the objective of life, then you will end up in the grave, right? Because then what will happen is you will die without understanding what is the true value of life. That is why grave has two meanings. One is that you end up in the grave, but you should be grave about your death. This is very important. So he became silent and grave because he took darshan. So every day that we take darshan, remember 6:16:31. And the purport is amazing. The purport is very short, but it's something we must remember. Prabhupada says the word tad darshana samasta kilbishaha is very important in this verse. If one regularly sees the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the temple, one will gradually be disinfected of all material desires. How nice. Simply by visiting the temple and seeing the deity. Simply by visiting. Don't even have to do anything. Just go and take darshan. When one is freed from all the results of sinful activities, one will be purified. With a healthy mind, completely cleansed, he can increasingly make progress in Krishna consciousness. This is the formula on how we can continuously improve our Krishna consciousness. Because we always ask this question, so many years I'm chanting, I feel I'm stuck in a rut. How to increase my Krishna consciousness? This purport, Prabhupada gives us the formula. And these deities are not only in the temple. Today, by Krishna's mercy, we all have deities at home at some point or the other. They, if we worship them well, they have all the tejas to give us this freedom from material contamination. So therefore, Chitraketu Maharaj offered beautiful prayers to Krishna, and his prayers are all prayers of gratitude. The most important prayer, he says, is that Krishna, now that you have appeared before me, I do not want to ask you for anything, because whatever I want to ask from you is already known to you. And he gives this very nice example. In the presence of a glowworm, in the presence of the sun, what is the value of the light of a glowworm? Nothing, isn't it? In the presence of Krishna, he knows everything. What is there for us to try and tell him anything? So Anantadev became very pleased and he blessed him. And what was his blessing? He said, O king, as a result of you having accepted the instructions spoken by me, by the great sages Narada and Angira, you have become completely aware of transcendental knowledge. Because you're educated in the spiritual science, you have now seen me face to face. Now you are completely purified. So nice. And therefore, Chitraketu Maharaj ends this episode becoming very peaceful. What conclusions can we draw from this wonderful pastime? This is very important. The first conclusion we can draw is what we call the journey of dualities. Harsha Shukha. That is the name of the child. When Angira Muni left, he said something very cryptic. You will have a child, but the child will be a source of happiness and lamentation. We don't realize that the nature of the world is such that for every moment of happiness, there is an equal moment of sadness. This is very important. But Bhagavatam tells us, while we're all running after happiness, nobody wants to run after sadness, but the miseries run after us. That we don't realize. We run after material happiness, but material miseries always catch up with us. This is an important point for us to remember. The other important point for us to remember is an amazing point, that actually Prahlad Maharaj, he says in 7.742 of Srimad Bhagavatam. When you have time, look at the verse. It's a shocking verse. When I first read it, I was really shocked. But then I realized it's so true. In that verse, he gives a very wonderful insight into the material world. He says every and diminishes distress. Isn't it true? Actually, all of us, if we're not careful, we become materialists very quickly. We all want to increase happiness and diminish our distress. So therefore, we act accordingly. But Prahlad Maharaj tells us this formula. You are happy as long as you do not endeavor for happiness. Think about it. You are happy as long as you don't endeavor for happiness. And then he ends with a frightening point. As soon as one begins his activities for happiness, that day the conditions of your distress begin. The day you start your journey for material happiness, that day all the conditions of distress, like unwanted son-in-laws who sit in your house, and don't do anything, they say, they'll just sit there and you have to feed them and take care of them, and you wonder when they are going to leave. All the conditions of distress will sit with you. This is Bhagavatam. This is Bhagavatam. Because Chitraketu Maharaj was trying to surrender to matter for happiness, his Sharanyam was wrong. And therefore his Sharanam also went haywire. You see the principle? It is so important. Who we surrender to is the key. That is the key. That's why Prabhupada gave us that story about the greatest person. You remember? It's a story we teach in children's school sometimes. There was a young man who wanted to serve the greatest person in the world. So he saw that the head villager was the greatest person. One day he served him very nicely. But one day he saw the head villager bowing his head to a tax collector. And he thought the tax collector is greater than the manager, the head villager. So he went to the tax collector and said, "Can I serve you, sir?" He said, "Sure." Then later he found the tax collector making all his reports to the king. So he thought the king is greater than the tax collector. He said, "Can I surrender to you?" King said, "Of course." Then one day he saw the king going to a sadhu and surrendering to him. And he said, who is this person that you are surrendering to? You are the head of the land. He said, I may be head of the land, but he is a great person. He is the sadhu, and I surrender to him. And so he went to the sadhu and said, you are greater than a king. Can I surrender to you? And the sadhu said, you don't have to surrender to me, because I am surrendered to the greatest person of all. And he asked, who is the greatest person? And the greatest person is actually Krishna. Krishna. And so this boy went to the temple, and there he tried to go inside because the deity room was closed. He didn't know what to do. So he prayed outside and said, Krishna, let me surrender to you because you are the one worthy of surrender, Sharanyam. And he went to sleep. Because Krishna was so happy with him, next morning when he woke up, he found that the deity chadar was actually on him because it was cold. So the priest became upset. They thought he had stolen the chadar. But when they actually looked inside, they found that the deity chadar was not there. And no one could have gone in because they had the keys. And they came to understand that the deity was so happy with this boy because in his journey, he had elevated himself from the journey of duality. Instead of looking for happiness, he just went to the source of true happiness, and that is Krishna. And that's what we must do. And that's what Chitraketu Maharaj is teaching us. The next point that he's teaching us is this very important point of how we should treat that which has come to us. The child came to him by providence. The queens are there by providence. In fact, nothing we have in this world is acquired by us, though we think it is. It's all coming because of the sanction of Krishna. If nothing belongs to us, then that which doesn't belong to us, we cannot hold it, but we can serve it. That is the mood of service. The moment Chitraketu Maharaj realized that, an entire perception of life changed. And that's why he became peaceful. And the last point that's very important for us is the great value of devotees. Chitraketu Maharaj would not have come out of this difficult point if not for the association, friendship, and love that Angira Muni and Narada Muni both gave him. That's very important. And because he was submissive and humble to accept that, the relationship was perfect. And the last but not least thing is that he was so humble enough that even he could accept instructions from his dead child. And that was a very powerful instruction to accept. So these are the beautiful points that Chitraketu Maharaj's life showed us. And one day, this situation will come upon us when a loved one will leave us or may have left us. And when that happens, we should remember this pastime very well. We should remember what the dead child said. It doesn't mean that a Vaishnava is not affectionate or loving, but we are always loving because everything is in relation to Krishna. And any living entity, Prabhupada said, who takes up Krishna consciousness, how much important they are to us and how much important must be our service to them. In a service mood, all these difficulties of attachment, naturally by Krishna's mercy and the mercy of the devotees, we will have the presence of mind to address it in the correct way. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Thank you very much for your time, Prabhus, Mataji.
Thank you, Prabhu. Are there any questions or comments? That is, Prabhu, if you have time to take them.
Of course, yes, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept my observation.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Mandal obeisance.
Prabhuji, as usual, it's such a wonderful class. And I have a question here. You are talking about the thinking, feeling, and willing are the three. That's also the three energy of Krishna, is it right? Thinking, feeling, and willing. The three energies of Krishna. And
Yes.
since we are not using that, so we are using in the wrong place. Is the right understanding?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And you know where you were getting this from, Prabhu? In the second canto, 10th chapter, the chapter entitled Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. If you read that chapter, it is so nicely stated how when the Supreme Personality of Godhead desired, desire was born into the whole world. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead began thinking, the mind was born into the world. Therefore, you're right. No function like thinking, feeling, and willing can even exist if not for the fact that Krishna had willed it to exist. It must have come from Krishna. In fact, Bhagavatam goes to the point that even that it states the organs of generation and evacuation are present in us because they are present in Krishna. Powerful chapter, Prabhu. And it underscores what you have said. And the implication of what you said is very important. When a devotee understands that every function that he is actually undertaking has its roots with Krishna, we will treat these functions with respect. We will see them in a different way, and that will help our consciousness. Is that helpful, Prabhu?
It's very helpful, Prabhuji. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. By the way, I enjoyed the Kirtan just now. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for that. It was so nice.
So, Prabhu, one question, very, very great class, Prabhu, and very nice points, which gives very like peace to the mind in this disturbing times. So, Prabhu, you said the Chitraketu Maharaj said this world, Narad Muni told him that this world is temporary. So, at the time of lamentation, this when we tell people this that this world is temporary, sometimes they say like if we think like that, we will lose motivation and the world will become very like seems like depressing. So how should we answer at this time?
Very good point. Very good point. I'm glad you brought this up. Actually, when we say these one important things are very important. If someone is really because they'll get fed up. Some people are not ready for it. And if you were to tell them such things, I agree with you, Prabhu. It's when you reveal this knowledge that's very important. My understanding and my experience is this. When someone is lamenting, it's very important we understand our relationship with them. When we are closer to them, they are more likely to hear us if we present this, right, in a very loving manner. I don't think it's possible from what I understand to immediately impress upon them the temporary nature of this world. We should allow them to grieve, actually, but important thing is to tell them to keep in memory their loved ones. There's nothing wrong remembering someone for all the good things that they have done. And I find when you actually talk to them that way and tell them the important thing is they may appear to have left, but Shastras tell us that they will always exist. The only question is, we are not in a position to understand where they are. When we tell them that they will always exist, many people start feeling a bit better because they know then that maybe something is separating us, but all is not lost. And when we tell them that we can, the best way to honor them, right, is to actually remember them for who they were. And if we pray and our prayers to Krishna are there, that wherever they are, they will be peaceful, then we direct them actually to the mode of being prayerful to Krishna. And to make them understand that except for this world, no one can handle these matters except Krishna. At that point of time, when you tell them that, even we ourselves don't know when we will go, better we invest our love for those who have left in our love for Krishna and pray for them. They will start accepting this better. And then later on, when we do have programs with them or we have time to sit with them, as they speak about, how the pain of separation is, you can then begin to share with them the fact that this pain of separation is there, but it is on the platform that everything will eventually leave us. So if we really want to make value in this world, we should look for that which will never leave us. In that way, Prabhu, we may have a chance, to present this philosophy in a sensitive and respectful manner. Is that helpful, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you. Thank you very much.
very sensitive to it, actually.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhishek Prabhu.
Are there any other questions or comments for Prabhu?
And thank you, bro, as usual. Wonderful class. And again,
Prabhu, thank you.
Emphasizing on association. But this association of Angira and Narad to Chitraketu, that has become their causeless mercy. So we have causeless mercy devotees like you to come and enlighten us. And I'm glad you will be doing it for next 2 months too. Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. I just booked myself in advance, you know. That's what I did.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So remember this pastime, right? Because after this, Chitraketu Maharaj will go off in a plane. And at that point of time, something very interesting will happen to him. And it can happen to any one of us. And the ins and outs of that episode, you know, is truly amazing. There is no scripture in this world that so correctly captures the human experience while being completely divine as Srimad Bhagavatam. All glories to Bhagavatam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada for his causeless mercy. And all glories to your glorious Sangha. You have a good week ahead. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.